Chapter 2. The Guides. Ms. Baxter. I don't remember how the invitation happened. I only remember that it felt like it was right, but also wrong. It was wrong because I was only 16 and I was going to a teacher's house, and I hadn't asked my parents. I didn't know what I was going for, but I knew if I asked my parents, they would probably say no. So she told me to come for 10 a.m. on a Saturday. The house was different from the other houses I knew. It was the end unit townhouse, connected to the one beside it. I was raised in a farmhouse, then a house in a small town, then a house in a bigger town. I don't recall having ever been in a townhouse before that day, and the levels were curious to me. Miss Carolyn Baxter greeted me at the door smelling of stale cigarettes and something else, something stronger, like vodka. We walked up to the first set of 8 stairs to her kitchen. She was sipping something translucent straight on ice, in a short glass. But it's only 10 a.m. You don't serve water like that. I was there for a reading. She sat me at the kitchen table and asked if I wanted water. There was a business card on the table in front of me. It read, Hugs Unlimited. The greatest journey is the journey within. Carolyn Baxter. Bachelor of Education, Graduate Diploma, Professional Speaker. Transformation Consultant. Her address and phone number were also on the card, and her address was in a neighborhood I always wanted to live as a kid, Woodacres. Woodacres was where the big houses were. I lived in Wood Valley, where the houses were average. We could have never afforded a Woodacres address when I was younger. I was in awe of the windows in her kitchen, and it seemed like her cat and dog loved the light that came through. It overlooked Fish Creek Park, a wall of pine trees in front of a clear blue sky. The sun was coming in hot and bright. Magpies, blue jays, and geese flew by the windows. There were stacks of cards on the table, not playing cards, but cards with symbols on them that said something about Egypt and angels. I'd never seen cards like them before. Tarot? Oracle? I was in high school. She was my high school psychology teacher for 2 years. When she walked down the hallway, students parted like the Red Sea. She had a presence, a boldness, and there was something about her voice. It scared others, but I was drawn to it. It was deep, raspy, probably from years of smoking. She was the only teacher that would come out to the smoke pit near her parked car and smoke back-to-back cigarettes during recess and lunch breaks. She'd put one high heel on her running board and lean on her open door, smoking without a care in the world, with underage kids standing in the smoking section designated by a yellow circle painted on the ground. She also taught in a more feminine way, full of wisdom, and could scare the shit out of you at the same time if you didn't know how to hear this voice. We would do meditations for some classes. I thought she was just trying to take a break herself when she would dim the lights and tell us to put our heads down with our eyes closed. She would start with a cassette tape of some twinkly wind chime music and walk us through a meditation. Half of us were stoned from smoking a joint at lunch, myself included, and did not take it seriously. However, years later, this is one practice that's become one of my most valuable tools to calm my central nervous system. It's also what I regularly teach others. She started shuffling the cards on the table, talking about things I didn't know. Tarot, past lives, intuition, angels, oracle, communicating with angels, spirit, transformation, and goddess energies. She spoke of conscious and subconscious states, words I spelled wrong in my journal when I later reflected on the experiences. We started with past life regression stories of who I was in past lives and how I was connected to people. There were visions of lives lived, lives lost, lessons learned, and lessons not learned that carry through to next lifetimes. She said my mom and I lived in a Greek fishing village, and our husbands were fishermen, and we were friends who would help each other see what we wanted out of life. She said my dad and I lived through the French Revolution together. She said my brother and I were twins in Europe when our parents died. We were about 9, and we went on the road becoming musicians together to make money, until he settled down with a nice girl, and I traveled and became a barmaid who never had children. She said she and I were in the Middle Ages, and she was a spiritual guide and psychic, but I never listened to her, and that's why our souls came back together here, in this time, now. She believed in one monotheistic God, one source, one energy that is the spirit of the source of life for all of us. We all have access to it. We are all connected to it, and we can all learn and grow from it. This was all something she understood years before I learned to connect to higher energies and take a higher perspective and get out of the cages we created for ourselves. She was called to teach me, her student, some of the language that would become my natural lexicon years down the road. She knew there was alignment for me to know her. It was a kind of magical connection, and a curious one. She was a woman in her 50s, and I was 16, but there was a knowing we were meant to connect and that I would need it. The kind of faith she connected me back to was not something I could have found on my own in the environment I was in. A kind of faith that kept me alive when my hands and legs were bound and I couldn't escape powerlessness at the harmful hands of others. As I mentioned earlier, there was no spiritual component to the religion I was raised in. It was more of a telling. When my parents moved away from it, I was certain I didn't want religion, but I didn't think about there being more out there. These things always caught my eye, like New Age displays of crystals and sun catchers in windows, books in libraries on topics too mature for me to understand, but were intriguing. In the short time Carolyn was in my life, she made herself known to be the greatest teacher I ever had, and still is. I don't hesitate for a second to admit that I don't understand what I understand, because it's the awe of what God and the universe and source energy does. It aligns people and places and situations to have profound impacts on each other here in this lifetime. We prepare each other. We warn each other. We share with each other. We teach each other. The seeds were planted in me to listen to an inner voice, feel the things around me that I couldn't see or tap into on my own, or learn from anyone else. She is a divine godsend. She was sent to me to show me another way to teach others what I was shown. Until she died, things changed. Chuck. I met a man in recovery. This was 2007, my first year in recovery, and he was chairing a recovery meeting. I'd just moved back from Korea, and he said he was a Korean war vet. For the next 9 years, we became friends. He called me twice a day. He was a grumpy old dude, and nobody liked him. He was inappropriate. I constantly told him, "You can't say that." He spoke like it was still the 70s and 80s, but I felt called to walk with him. He was never married, never had kids. He said his mom died at childbirth. One time, he had to go to the hospital for a hernia operation, but he was so scared of the hospital. He lived in the same apartment at 8 and 8 for 35 years. He did the same routine every day, including 3 meetings for recovery. Every day he was in bed by 5:30 p.m. and up at 4:30 a.m. He never had cable and only listened to CBC radio. I took him for the doctor's appointments because he was in pain and said I would accompany him. That's a service part of the recovery world, which is about getting out of yourself and your selfishness. Sometimes it's offering coffee to people, volunteering your time, or helping people move. But you have to be careful you don't start over-helping and over-giving and using it as a sense of ego. When I brought Chuck to his appointment, he put me down on paper as his only next of kin. Then one day, for the first time in 5 years, I don't hear from him. No calls, nothing. I don't hear from him the next day either, and I can't get a hold of him. I called the apartment manager first, and he said he couldn't do anything, so we called the police asking for a wellness check. I followed them into Chuck's apartment. He was in the fetal position in bed, and he didn't want to go in the ambulance. He said he would only go if I drove him. The police loaded him into my car, and I turned on my voice recorder, and he said, "Jill, the painting of the clouds on the wall opened up, and they said I'm wanted in heaven. And then they showed me you drive me to the hospital, and I never get out." I'm on the voice recording saying, "Oh, it's okay, Chuck. Let's go get this checked out. You probably just need to get some medication or a specialist." We get to the ER, and eventually the doctor brings me the x-ray and shows me the dark spots on the illuminated image. He said Chuck has cancer in every single organ, and we should have detected this years ago. He's not leaving the hospital. I have Elizabeth Gilbert's book, Big Magic, in my hands. That was the book I'd started, and it was all about knowing. And I sat there with him knowing this wasn't good. He went from diagnosis to death in 4 months and died in my arms. He never went back home. And because he wrote it on a piece of paper years before, I was the person to make all the end-of-life decisions for him. I suddenly had no work and had my sons full-time because of a child care issue, and I was walking this man to the end of his life. My pictures from those 3 months are my son's in palliative care unit with us because I had to go every day until I held him in the RC hospice for his last breath. And if you hold somebody in hospice for their last breath, you know when the soul leaves the body. Chuck was unconscious when we transferred him from Peter Lougheed to Sarseed Hospice. He'd had a heart attack and slipped off the bed. I've never seen anyone have a heart attack and actually look like that. What I saw was something out of the Exorcist movie, like a body flailing. A guy from high school who was in Miss Baxter's class came in as the EMT for the transfer, so I felt like I was okay. I would meet them at the hospice. When we got there, there was a dim lamp on the bedside and pot lights, and Chuck opened his eyes and said, "Turn off the light," and then said, "Turn on that one." He hadn't spoken in days. I wondered, "You really want the bright fluorescent lights on?" And I told myself, "Just do it." He rolled towards the pot light, and he went exactly like he said he would. There were clouds on the picture that opened up, and it was so great. I was driving home past the Rocky View Hospital, and I felt an embrace from behind me and a voice that said, "Thank you for bringing my baby home." Then I hit the curb. I actually thought somebody was in the car, and that's how I know there is a spirit and soul, because I have felt it, I have heard it, and I have seen it. Arthur. I took this to Arthur, my psychologist. We'd been working together since 2015, and Arthur might be the only person in my life who knows most of my story. Well, not my whole story, but most of it. There's still stuff I'm ashamed to tell anyone. He's the only person I found a way to open up to that helps uncover what I really need to say and where that's coming from within. It's usually one-liners that he leaves me with. The knowings I have and the place it comes from is deep, and it's wise. It's not understood by everyone, but he understands. He's been the voice of questions, reason, challenge, support, encouragement, understanding, and sometimes he just shakes his head in silence, the kind of presence I need. If I could afford to see him weekly, I would. Odd duck is how I've been described by others, and something Arthur would say isn't exactly wrong. In his Eastern European accent laced with lived experience, wisdom, religious understanding, and a careful approach to traditional psychology and pathology, he was right. And my ex-husband was right. I'm an odd duck, and I locked myself in a cage I didn't want to be in. My perspective had dimmed so dark that I was a bird flocking with no one, alone in my cage. My soul and inner desires were screaming for more, and on eagle's wings is the only way I could imagine myself soaring out of where I was to where I want to be. Arthur has helped me learn to open the cage from the inside out, and with that comes a kind of transformation and change. If the right person can ask the right questions, the soul and mind and body can go through changes of all sorts, like a caterpillar to a cocoon to a butterfly. I am an odd duck. While I value the flocks and communities around me, I will always walk a little bit different walk, and that's okay. While I didn't connect with those around me very much, I did connect with who I was within me. There's not one way. There's not one truth. They've been tainted. There's not one way, but the right person can ask the right questions for you to discover your way, and that's my hope with this book for you. It starts a conversation with yourself to align with your Arthur, counselor, therapist, psychologist, or psychiatrist. Once you do a deep dive into yourself with some inquiry and journaling, you're also going to need some new teachers, either physical people you listen to or people who've passed, whose words are still vibrating off the lips of many in a positive or positively critical way. There's more than we know. Arthur keeps me curious. As a student out of high school, I took a couple years off to find myself and run around Europe, India, Costa Rica, and Western Canada. It turns out myself wasn't there, but I found something else. And that's a lot of questioning of what I was told is truth and true growing up. There is a ceiling to academics and scientific thinking that I was taught up until this point, but I didn't know that before. Things change, people change, we change, and that's okay. You can change your mind too. To investigate your inner world, you have to find some data to analyze from your soul. You can do this by going within and meditating, and you can do this by writing a journal to yourself.